In the beginning, baseball was a newspaper sport. But as great as baseball newspaper coverage was in the 1920s, technology soon took over. And before long, broadcasting stations were announcing their play-by-play to an ever-increasing number of listeners. And so in 1927, the National Broadcasting Company relayed a World Series broadcast across its network of stations for the very first nationwide baseball broadcast. And the radio age of baseball was officially born. Now, don't get too excited. We don't actually have copies of any of those games from the 1920s, but we do have copies of games from the 1930s. In fact, we have more games from the 1930s than you think we do. And that's really what this video is all about. This is about the lost and forgotten art of baseball radio broadcasting. And in particular, I really need to emphasize our need to preserve and to share all of this stuff. You probably don't know who this man is, though you should. This is John Miley, who allegedly has a collection of well over 44,000 different sports radio broadcasts. Miley's collection has long been famous for how complete it is, as well as how inaccessible it is. John Miley was famously reluctant to allow any public access to his collection for decades, and to be frank with you, he was kind of a jerk about this. It makes it really, really frustrating for people who want to collect it for a variety of reasons, in part for historical reasons or because you want to learn from that or whatever it is. Right? There are people like me who have known for a long time that the good stuff is out there and that we couldn't get at it. But this is all changing, especially now that Miley is in his mid-90s. Over the past 3 decades, I've amassed a collection of 2,000 broadcasts or so, not as impressive as Miley, but still quite a bit. And I've switched my attention to getting broadcasts in the highest quality possible. Now, as you probably already know, there are somewhat large collections on places like the Internet Archive. In fact, many of those collections are actually copies of files that a group of us digitized about 15 years ago. But the problem here is that those are lossy copies of the original broadcasts, and also in many cases they're actually incomplete. And you can hear the difference if you listen. You can even hear it here, despite the fact that YouTube also compresses audio and does a whole bunch of stupid things with it. So for example, here is a small bit of the September 17th, 1961 Yankees at Tigers game. First the older digitized version and then the lossless version.
On the mound for Detroit, Jim Bunning. 116 and lost 11 against the Yankees. He's 0-1 this year, and lifetime against New York, 7 wins, 8 defeats. On the mound for Detroit, Jim Bunning. 116 and lost 11 against the Yankees. He's 0-1 this year, and lifetime against New York, 7 wins, 8 defeats.
Anyway, you can hear that difference, right? And now the funny thing is that the version I have in high quality is 4 hours long. The version that I had in MP3 quality was like 2 hours, 20 minutes. Now, if you're interested in the good stuff, if you want to check out the full collection, which you should, go check out my Patreon page in the description of the video. $5 gets you access to everything, and I'm adding new radio broadcasts all the time. In fact, if you combine the radio and television stuff that I've got that's accessible through Patreon, you're looking at over 4 terabytes of data, and it's growing. Now, you're probably wondering how in the heck we have all of these old broadcasts, right? After all, it's not like people were walking around with tape recorders back in 1934. The 1934 All-Star Game is the oldest game that we have a copy of, and we actually have both the NBC and CBS broadcasts. Of course, this was the famous game where Carl Hubbell struck out 5 Hall of Famers in a row. Here he is striking out Babe Ruth as called by NBC.
Strike 2 and ball 1 is the count. Tiny Manouche is on first. Charlie Gehringer is on second. Nobody is out. Carl Hubbell, the great National League southpaw of the Giants, is in the box. Here it is. Strike 3! Strike 3! He's out!
And here's the same call by CBS, but note that we've only got the first half of its broadcast of this game.
2 strikes and 1 ball is the count on Babe Ruth. Gehringer on second. Manouche on first base. Hubbell's getting set. Here's the pitch. And it's strike 3 call. Babe Ruth is called out on strike for the initial out. Babe Ruth called out on strike. Down in the bullpen, down in the right field section, it looks like Lon Warnicki from here warming up for the National Leaguers.
So the story behind this and behind a lot of the other 1930s broadcasts is that Commissioner Kennesaw Mountain Landis was worried that the radio broadcasters were criticizing him behind his back. Yeah, he was pretty paranoid, like a lot of other people that we know that try to amass absolute power to themselves. Hint, hint. Anyway, so Landis had a bunch of these transcription discs made to record the broadcast from all of the networks that aired the World Series so he could review them himself. If you're familiar with old records, you've probably seen a lot of these 7-inch 45 RPM records, which were really common, especially after World War II. Before World War II, most consumer records were 10 inches and 78 RPM, like these that I found during a recent Goodwill trip. Transcription discs, however, were a lot larger, bulkier, and more fragile. By 1934, the companies that made this stuff were using a material called Victrolax, state-of-the-art at the time, but actually really brittle and prone to deterioration. One of these 16-inch discs probably held about 15 minutes of the broadcast per side, and so you would need a lot of these to cover something like 3 hours of baseball. Now, I've heard from other collectors and have also seen in books that the Hall of Fame originally had these discs. Sometime in the late 1980s, I think it is, or perhaps early 80s, one of the people in the radio collecting scene received permission from the Hall of Fame to create high-quality cassette tape copies of the original transcription discs. Those broadcasts, the tape recordings, have slowly crept into the public from that collection, and there's a lot more of them out there that have not really spread very wide yet. In fact, we know for a fact that there are games out there that have not been released, and I will show you how we know that. The Library of Congress has a tremendously large collection of sound recordings, although the vast majority are very, very difficult for the public to access. You're supposed to make appointments in advance, and you're only allowed to visit in person, and there's a limit to what you can listen to for each listening session. Now, if you check out their outdated and cumbersome database search tool, you will find really rare baseball stuff in no time. There's a wealth of old broadcasts being stored at the Library of Congress, stuff that likely only serious researchers will ever be able to access. And unfortunately, if you want to get a digital copy, it's going to cost you $126 for 1 hour of audio plus a setup fee. And so as a result, it's really frustrating to see press releases like this, where Miley's collection wound up passing from one fortress to another, all in the false name of being accessible to the public. But recordings have gotten out as time has gone on and will continue to get out. Now, things are being digitized frequently, and it will surprise you to know just how much stuff is already out there and how good the quality is. It would take a lifetime to listen to it all, and more is coming. But unfortunately, there's a lot that you might not want to listen to. The oldest broadcasters, guys like Tom Manning, were little more than newscasters and would only give you the score, the situation, and the result of the play. In fact, it wasn't really until Red Barber in the mid-1930s that the more conversational style of baseball broadcasting started. Barber's southern accent and staccato style gave a certain at-home feel to the broadcast, as you can hear in this clip from the Mutual broadcast of Game 3 of the 1935 World Series.
He takes the lead down on second. Walker looks at him for a moment. Down comes the pitch. Gallant swings, misses, and spins halfway around in windmill fashion. He almost figured himself out when he didn't connect. Now it's 1-1. Augie Gallant. Little Frenchman, puts those brown eyes. Catches Walker, the pitch. It's in there. Gallant swings on. It's a shot line drive through the hole between first and second to deep right field. It's a clean hit. Jurgis round third, comes into the plate. And Gallant holds up at first with a single. Then when the ball rolls through the infield, gets away from Cochran for the moment. Gallant, a leg goes down 2 seconds.
Now, that speed might sound a little bit fast to your ears, but it's also a lot easier to follow along with than, Tom Manning and Graham McNamee. Red Barber was really the first to take baseball broadcast from being, just a news report, like you're just going to read what's happening in front of you, and turning it instead into a conversation with the listener. It just so happens that he spoke a little bit fast. And because he did this, Red Barber was a national sensation right from the get-go. And Red Barber was also known for his amazing ability to craft recreations of baseball games. So here's a brief clip of a 1939 spring training game between the Yankees and the Reds, which is broadcast from hundreds of miles away by a man who couldn't actually see what was happening.
Harry Kraft. Joe DiMaggio, a big right-handed hitter. He gets a big hand from the fans down at Tampa, Florida. The weather is sunshiny and clear, temperature at 80 degrees, and there's a little breeze that's blowing from the back of first base toward third, which means it helps those hitters who hit toward left field. Big Grissom comes in with a pitch, and DiMaggio swinging pulls it foul on the ground behind third base for strike one.
So if you're like me, if you foolishly tried your hand at broadcasting baseball sims that you play while you're playing them, then you know just how hard it is to do this. Red Barber was a master, no doubt about it, but there was one broadcaster who was better, and I'll bet that most of you have never really thought of this man. Gordon McClendon, the old Scotchman, was the greatest master in the history of radio baseball recreations. The daily games that he and his team broadcast over the Liberty Broadcasting Service reached most of the country and were masterpieces colored by McClendon's amazing imagination. McClendon was the greatest master of inventing a broadcast by telegraph wire, and we actually do have a few broadcasts to prove that. So there are 3 recordings out there that I know of that showcase McClendon's talents. Now 2 of them are historical recreations, and the third is arguably the most famous baseball game of all time. Now I want to play for you part of McClendon's recreation of Game 5 of the 1920 World Series. This is of course a game that was played before baseball was ever even broadcast on the radio. Game 5 of the 1920 World Series is famous for 2 reasons. Here's the first.
Elmer Smith at bat. Burley Grimes on the mound. Right-hand pitcher. Burley delivers. Spitball swung on. There's the drive. Way out there in right field going. Tony Griffith is back. This one is over his head and over the wall for a home run. A grand slam home run for Elmer Smith, the first in World Series history.
And here's the second part, which I'm sure you've read about.
Johnny Sheehan down in the hole for Wilbert Robinson's Minions. Cleveland 7 and Brooklyn 0. That's the score. Elmer Smith's first inning home run with the bases full. The first time it's ever been done in a Fall Classic is still the talk of the crowd. 1 ball and 1 strike. Bagby rocks to 5. There's a pitch swung on and driven back down toward Wamsgans. Bears spares it and steps on second for a double play and starts to throw to first and no hold. And Tag killed off on Tag's Miller coming in, and it's an unassisted triple play. And we have seen history made twice this afternoon. A line drive, thanks to Wamsgans, and Billy took it, speared it on the fly. Touched second, that double killed off. Petey was out before he could get back. And then Wamsgans turned around, started to throw to Doc Johnston down at first base, and then Johnston evidently told him not to throw to him because the force, just to tag the runner coming in. Not to throw down because the runner, Otto Miller, coming down to second base, was definitely going to try for second. So Doc Johnston says, tag him coming in, and it's an unassisted triple play. That is another thing.
Now, of course, you know that this is a recreation. But I'm telling you, the quality of this recreation here is just absolutely amazing. In fact, I would argue that this broadcast is more fun to listen to than an actual live broadcast would be. The reason why is because McClendon had the freedom to paint a picture just the way that he wanted to. There was really no time pressure on him. Sometimes fiction really does beat truth. But McClendon's greatest work was unquestionably his broadcast of the 3rd game of the 1951 playoff between the Brooklyn Dodgers and the New York Giants. And in this case, the broadcast was no recreation. This was a live broadcast that went all across the United States. Now, there have been people on certain message boards and long-lost listservs who have speculated that this broadcast was a recreation. However, we know from contemporary newspaper coverage that Liberty did indeed broadcast the game live. And so here was Liberty's famous baseball game of the day from October 3rd, 1951.
Brooklyn Dodgers and the New York Giants final sudden death showdown payoff game, the playoff payoff. Here's Carl Furlow against Sal Magley. First half of the first inning of a game I'm sure that we will all long remember.
Now, there are some people, especially on the listserv I showed you, that have said that they can't stand McClendon's style because of his endless descriptions. Personally, though, I love it, and I wish that I could come up with stuff like this on the fly. It really is poetry in motion. There's something that's very literary about the way that he would broadcast a game. Gordon McClendon is the most underrated broadcaster in the history of baseball, no question about that. And the real fun part is that there is a much better quality broadcast of the very end of that game out there, one that most of you likely still have not heard. Now, this clip comes from another YouTube channel. This is from a good friend of mine who was fortunate enough to find the master tape. And it is obvious that this is a live recording directly from the Polo Grounds because you can hear it in the public address announcer's voice in the background.
Jansen, considered by many as the best pitcher in the big time today, sterling right-hander. He can knock a fly off a bat at 60 feet. walks only an average of one man every 4 innings, has great control, a good hop on his fast one, a good curve, a good slider. So here, quiet, unassuming family man Larry Jansen from Forest Grove, Oregon, to pitch the top half of the 9th inning against the Brooklyn Dodgers with Rafael Noble, spelled as though it were pronounced Noble.
Now, of course, it would be cruel of me if I didn't also play the ending for you.
Branca has that tremendous overarm sinker curve that drops down. Then he has a roundhouse hook curve to right-hand batters by way of third. Extremely effective against right-handers. 2 pitchers in the Dodgers bullpen now. I think one of them's Rowe. Here's Bobby waiting. Branca throws. Bobby swings. Nice long line drive to left. Going. Go! Good chance. Win the pennant.
Now, McClendon understood the power of the sound of the crowd behind him, and he had a very natural flair for the dramatic. And when I say that, there's another name that should pop into your mind immediately, and this is the man that we all know of as probably the greatest baseball broadcaster of all time. Vin Scully got his big break in 1950 when Red Barber hired him to work together with him on the Brooklyn Dodgers broadcasting team. The young Scully had only been in sports broadcasting for a few months by that time. The broadcast that did the trick was this November 12, 1949 Maryland at Boston University game from a frozen Fenway Park. Boston had come into the game undefeated and was ranked 15th in the country, but fell to Maryland by a single point. And if all the attention on Boston University seems odd to you, remember that this is back when Ivy League schools were still considered relevant in the national college football picture. So Scully's broadcast of that football game impressed Red Barber, who was kind of his boss at NBC. It really complicated the way that all of this worked at that time. Anyway, the rest is history. Now, Vin Scully's style combined the conversational approach of Red Barber with that flair for the dramatic that came so natural to Gordon McClendon. There are hundreds upon hundreds of hours of Vin Scully to choose from just on the radio. I'll give you a very small sample here. Scully, for example, was a master at introducing relatively unknown players to the audience, something that nobody since has been able to match.
Nolan Ryan has had the reputation and has showed it that he can throw as hard as anybody. This year he has worked 63 innings. He has 63 strikeouts. He can really hurry that ball up to the plate. He's a big right-hander. He's had a military obligation to fulfill, so he should be a little rusty. He pitched batting practice last night, and now he's in a tough one, all even at 4-4, and Costco at the plate. Nolan's fastball, a strike. Nolan Ryan. His first name is Lynn Nolan. He's from Refugio, Texas. Makes his home in Alvin, Texas. Strike 1 pitch. Fastball, fouled right down on Costco's foot, and that sends him on his knees in pain, and the count 0-2.
So, if you've been paying attention, you can see the evolution of baseball broadcasting over the years. So we went from the beginning with Tom Manning sort of stiffly telling us the result as if he were like reading from the retro sheet play-by-play list, right? We then had Red Barber, who was telling us what happened as if we were old friends and we were sort of sitting on the porch talking about it. And then there was McClendon, who took a lot more time to tell us about the players and what it looked like and what was happening, and he started to use his imagination to paint a certain picture for us. And then in the end, you had Vin Scully, who combined the best of all worlds together. During the 1993 World Series, I remember my dad muting the television audio so we could listen to the master do the game on the radio.
Championship one. So here we go. Those are the numbers. They're all based on history. Now let's put all eyes on the present. Ricky Henderson, followed by Devon White, then Roberto Alomar. Henderson starting to play well again, hitting .300, 3 for 10 in the series. Right-hand hitter deep on the box, and Tommy Green's pitch in there for a strike, and we're underway.
Now, I could go on and on and on about this, but there's one more story that I really need to tell you before we finish. And this is how we got the large collection of games that we have from the 1960s. Pat Rispoli was his name, a man who spent almost all of his time making reel-to-reel recordings of baseball broadcasts. We know Rispoli started his work in 1957, recording games that were broadcast in Schenectady, New York, which is where he lived. There are reports that his collection numbers over 3,000 different broadcasts. And it's pretty clear that not even half of what he recorded has actually been made public. Now, John Miley would be a nobody if it weren't for Pat Rispoli. I really, really mean that, right? Like, having some of the really old games is okay, but the fact is that John Miley was able to buy this monstrous collection of like 3,000 something games, and then he sat on it for decades. And there's more out there than just that, believe it or not. There were also groups of people who started collecting and trading and taping local games, local broadcasts, starting back in the late 1970s. I know that there's a lot of those games out there because I have quite a few, especially from 1977 and 78. And I know that they continue to do this for decades. And the reason why I know that is because I have some of the tapes. This is a collection that I helped digitize over the last few months. These are all Chicago White Sox games from the late 1980s and early 1990s. And I strongly suspect that there are a lot more tapes like this out there somewhere. So if you have a collection like this sitting around gathering dust, if you have like a closet full of old tapes, you don't know what to do with it, or if you're a serious collector, if you have like a large electronic collection of this stuff, please get in touch with me. And if you want to become a serious collector, please check out my Patreon page. I've got a whole ton of stuff to offer. I'm adding new stuff all the time, and I really want to make sure that we get this stuff spread out there as widely as possible this time around. So what I really believe about this is that more people, especially younger people, need to know about this stuff and need to listen to these games so we can get the quality of modern baseball broadcasts up to a much higher level. While I know that this part of the hobby is small, it's about time that it grew. And while there is a bunch of stuff on YouTube, there's much better quality stuff out there. Remember too that YouTube is not a long-term storage solution. If we combine our efforts, we can save all of these games before it's too late. Now remember that your old audio tapes are going to degrade over time. And if you have any of those old transcription discs sitting around, like, you really need to digitize it, especially if you actually have a machine that works that's capable of playing them. Look, we need to work together to digitize this stuff and to save it and to share it. The reason why is because it's imperative that future generations have access to this stuff so that they can learn from it.